What's up, everybody? Thrall's Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic, and I have yet another collection update for you. This one is going to be mostly new releases. I'm, pretty much trying to catch up with all the stuff that I missed out, stuff we just didn't have time to review, just because there were so many damn releases this year that it was damn near impossible to cover even the ones that I really wanted to. But as well as new releases, I also have some stuff from the Metalhead box here. There's also the awesome package that Adirondack Black Mask sent us to. I also have a band that sent me an album to check out. And also I got some stuff from a fellow YouTuber, Mark Aruda, sent me a package of stuff specifically from Ontario. So yeah, a lot of different things in here, and we're just gonna get right down to it. Yob Elaborations of Carbon. This is the debut album from this Oregon-based stoner, doom, post-metal, I don't know, it's Yob. Yob is amazing. I love pretty much everything they've put out, including this one, which this was the only full length that I was missing, and this is the 2023 remaster of it. I have not heard the original, but I know I really dig this one, and it is a little bit different than the Yob that I'm used to, which I think I started around the Great Cessation, or it could be the Unreal Never Lived. I'm not entirely sure which one I started with, but I knew I loved it pretty much automatically. But this one is like a little bit different than their later stuff. It is maybe slightly less atmospheric, or just atmospheric in a different way. Like, a lot of this is just more about the riffs and the droning. I think the guitar tone itself has a little bit more crunch to it. A lot of the stuff now I think is a little bit more like drony and fuzzy. Like, these have some kind of high on fire crunch to them. And that also goes with the vocals too. There's a lot more screamed and growled vocals on here versus now you kind of get a really good mix, and you also get a lot of singing too. But you still get what I love about this band, the long drawn out, huge build-ups and giant chuggy riffs. All the Children Forgotten is probably my big standout here. I love the heavier vocals, the big chunky chuggy riffs, and then this giant open atmosphere. And the songwriting dynamics are amazing. The song really just takes you on just a dark, sort of slow-paced journey. And this also has two shorter tracks, or at least shorter for Yob, Pain of Eye and Clear Seeing. And they're a little bit different. Clear Seeing actually has a really cool drum and bass groove. It's a little bit more on the stoner metal side. It's kind of Sabbathy, and it's just got a good swing to the rhythm. And Pain is just heavier than hell. It's a super dark, lumbering, just nasty song, but again, it's under that 10-minute mark, which all the other tracks on here outside of those two are definitely longer and more labored. But this album feels just a little bit different than, the other albums, at least kind of going forward. I think the main effect used on the guitars, I feel like, is mostly a wah pedal, which is very effective. It works throughout the entire album, but it doesn't have that big kind of post-metal openness, which they would really get good at later. I think that element is teased a little bit more in the last track, Asleep in Some Sorrow, where you have these looped, droning chants to just kind of create this weird, unsettling atmosphere. It gets real stompy and heavy towards the end. I love this. I mean, I kind of knew I would. I can't really think of a Yob album that I don't like, which would inevitably make this a really difficult ranking where I would struggle mightily and feel bad putting any of these albums in last place, but I dig this one. This is flat out riffy and heavy. It's a little bit more straightforward than their other albums, but it's still very sonically huge, and there's a lot of cool atmosphere going on. This is just a fantastic album by a fantastic band. I pretty much can just leave it at that. But if for whatever reason you haven't heard this album or this band, if you're a fan of Monolord, Sleep, Early High and Fire, check this out. Check all their stuff out. I don't think there is a bad Yob album. We've been over that, but yeah, just listen to it. It's awesome. Bacterial Husk, Anthropogenic Ruin. This is the first album from this Boston-based death metal act. I got this in the Metalhead box. I heard a lot of people raving about it, so I was really eager to dig into this one. Now, looking at this band, I really don't know much about them. I know that one of their guitarists was in a band called Sexcrement, and I found that band name pretty fascinating, and I'm just kind of morbidly curious about that band in general. But this is absolutely fantastic. Old school, I don't know, kind of technical death metal. This is just riffy and awesome and dynamic as hell. Like, you get kind of a smorgasbord of just different styles of death metal in here. You have way more technical stuff that comes across as like closer to like atheist and cynic in spots. Kind of comparable to like, you know, current bands like Slugage or Zoth a little bit, though not quite as technical as Zoth. Like, this is definitely way more riff based. Like, you get great tremolos, killer grooves and breakdowns. There's a lot of stuff that is very like Floridian too, like, you know, Morbid Angel, Monstrosity, and a good thrashy backbone behind some of these more up-tempo sections, like on Flayed by Anomalies, Corrupted Hydrosphere, and the last track, Starving the Immortal. You have alternating vocals between high screams and low growls done by two different members of the band, so the trade-offs I think are really cool. There's awesome lead work on here, but honestly it's the riff work. The riff work on here is amazing. This album is super tight. Whether it's going for like more proggy or like kind of like techie spots, or it's just good heavy old school death metal grooves or like thrashy sections, the transitions are almost seamless, and I just really dug this album across the board. Like, I really didn't find any lulls in here, and every song I was greeted with some fun, creative, catchy riffs. And right away the album opens up with just a flat out disgusting pace setter with Spores of Hallucinosis. Just has this sludgy, dirty, kind of bendy tremolo, like very Morbid Angel-ish, but again, as these songs keep going, you get greeted to just a riff storm, and it's just assembled so damn well. So yeah, pretty much every track in here is a banger. I absolutely love this album, which is problematic because I love a lot of albums this year, and once again, like, death metal is just kind of going off and having a banner year with both old school bands and new bands. Everything on here I think is solid. I think the production's really good. You know, the drums kind of have like an odd sound to them, but I could overlook that in favor of just great songs in here. If you're a fan, again, of, you know, Morbid Angel, again, like Monstrosity, Atheist, Zoth, Slugage, stuff like that, you know, it's definitely got a really weird sci-fi theme and some cool atmosphere to it. Definitely check this out. This is an absolutely amazing debut album, and I'm already looking forward to more from them. So yeah, check this out. Another killer death metal release, and a litany of killer death metal releases this year. But it is 100% worth your time if you're a death metal fan, because yeah, this is just killer, so check it out. Resthaven. This is the self-titled debut from this Canadian thrash metal / post-metal act. I know those two really don't seem like they fit together, but apparently he calls this project shoegazing thrash metal, which the only band that I can think of that actually does something kind of like that would be Astronoid, but this doesn't sound like Astronoid. So this was my first exposure to this band, and the description definitely had me scratching my head, but when I listened to it, I don't even know if that description of it, the shoegazing thrash metal thing, is accurate, because I also hear a lot of black metal. Like, the vocals are mostly shrill screams and occasional growls. The guitars are super gainy. Like, they are crackling and hissing, and it sounds a little off-putting at times. Like, there's almost too much gain on them. It kind of gives this whole album a very, like, rough sound. Like, it's very squawky. It's almost kind of punk in a way. Like, it's just being played very fast and very aggressively. There are slower sections, and there's some songs in here that I think, like, that idea of what they're doing really starts to gel. Like, the big standouts in here for me were the 3-track run of Prolly, that's Prolly, and Agon, or Agony, I don't know, Agone, and Dystopoulos. Those songs I thought were really interesting just in terms of, like, the dynamics they include. Like, Agony, or Agon, however the hell you say it, I'm really not sure. That song has like a really interesting spoken word buildup, and there's some flat out like crushing riffs on there. There's even like a almost sort of like doomy breakdown on it that I think was really awesome. There's some big flat out rock riffs on Dystopoulos. They're kind of like punky and catchy. There's a lot more like clean playing on there. I think there's even like some acoustic guitars that come in, and Probably's just got some flat out good thrash riffs on there. You know, it's the guitar tone that kind of puts me off, because again, it just sounds very squawky and gainy, and sometimes it's hard to make out the melody between all of the like kind of TV static riffs that are on here. But when you can hear them, they are honestly pretty solid. And I think it was that track that had like a very strange anime sample in it. Like, I don't know. It just kind of pops in there, and I don't know, it kind of contributes to the atmosphere. But when you get down to like the Blades, that song almost sounds like grindcore, like really early grindcore. Like, I got some like serious Repulsion vibes from it. Pretty much overall, this album is just kind of strange. Like, it's a weird hybrid of a lot of just noisy, just kind of chaotic stuff. And again, I don't know if the descriptor of it being post thrash metal is accurate, or shoegazy thrash metal. I don't know. Like, I get a lot of black metal still, but it does have thrash riffs. It does have some shoegazy parts. I don't know. This is just kind of strange. I still liked it. I just don't know how much I would actually return to it. But yeah, if you're a fan of, oh man, I really don't know. I don't know. If you're a fan of just like weird experimental music and you like it very punky and loud and obnoxious, check this out. It's an interesting listen. I can't say whether or not it's good or bad. I'm really on the fence about that, but there were some things I did enjoy about it. So yeah, check it out. Nighthawk Prowler. This is the second album from this Danish hard rock slash kind of heavy metal act. This was a blind buy for me. My buddy at the record store recommended it to me and said, hey, this has got a lot of like cool, like Thin Lizzy-ish stuff on here, and you know, the hype sticker sounds pretty cool. I was like, yeah, you know what? I'll check it out. But when I got back and looked up all the information behind it, I was actually pretty fascinated by it. Now, this started off as a one-man project. I forget the gentleman who does the bulk of the writing on here, but he just likes playing, you know, very classic sounding rock music, like a lot of like Deep Purple, Uriah Heep, early Saxon, Toto, I would even throw in there too. And, you know, bands like the Helicopters and Night Flight Orchestra, which that ties into this band because, well, he got some guests on here, and his singer throughout the entire album is Speed from Soilwork and Night Flight Orchestra. The other thing I found fascinating was that this was recorded live in the studio in just 2 days, and it's really good. This whole thing is just about solid hooks, good sing-along choruses, and Speed is just an amazing vocalist. So yeah, he knows how to deliver a good vocal hook, but there's also great riffy hooks. The song Running Wild, Flame Still Burns, absolutely just catchy, infectious songs that kind of hark back to, I don't know, like late 70s, but also early 80s as well. The songs are kind of short, to the point, they get down to the hook really quickly, and they're all just really fun to listen to. I think the only song that I ended up not liking as much, but still enjoyed, was Action. I kind of felt like that was a filler, and it's a really short track, and it kind of just doesn't go anywhere. But the rest of the songs, as short as they are, they really kind of just get to the point, get to that, you know, big catchy hook, and then on to the next one. And they also squeezed in a couple of covers on here. They do Kiss's God of Thunder, which they nail it. It sounds great. I'm not the biggest Kiss fan, but the God of Thunder riff's a sick riff. I gotta give it to them. And you know, they absolutely crush it on here. And the other one is Cover Me by Bruce Springsteen, which is just an awesome song. I mean, I grew up on Bruce Springsteen. My mom played Born in the USA, that tape in the car, just pretty much forever. Like, that thing was almost always in there, along with, you know, Car Self-Titled, and, well, there's probably a Hall & Oates one that was frequently in there, ZZ Top's in the winter. All right, it was in the cycle. But they do an amazing job on that. And yeah, this whole thing is just a solid rock album. It's retro as hell, but it's done with a lot of love and passion for the, you know, bands that they are emulating on here. Like, I want to say I even heard some like Huey Lewis and the News style stuff on here. Yeah, this is just a fun listen. And the gentleman that put all this together, hats off. Like, he got a lot of killer players on here. You know, the drum work's solid. Speed's vocals are absolutely amazing. He absolutely crushes it on this. And there's even just a little bit of like classic heavy metal kind of scattered on here in terms of the guitar harmonies and such to give it a slightly metallic edge on certain moments. I wouldn't say there's an entire song in here that is metal, but I didn't care. I ended up enjoying this whole thing, and it's kind of a quick listen, but it's really good pretty much start to finish. So yeah, if you love stuff like Uriah Heep, Bruce Springsteen, Toto, God, I don't know, just think of like good old school rock bands, you know, from the late 70s to early 80s, or maybe a little bit either way there. just check this out. This is just a really solid listen. I kind of want to check out the first one now and see what that one's all about. But yeah, so far, this is absolutely killer. All right, we got a split here between Closed Casket Funeral and Starring Janet Leigh. This came out in 2006, and this is the start of the package that I got from Mark Aruda. Super awesome dude. He fronts the band Aquila. He's a big fan of the channel. Almost always in the chat, always good talking to him. And he told me a while ago he was going to send me some stuff, all specifically from Ontario. And I was really curious about that because, I mean, there's probably going to be like a lot of stuff that I'd never heard of, and I had never heard of both of these bands. So starting with Closed Casket Funeral, they were a deathcore / mathcore band back in the early to mid 2000s. I believe they broke up not too long after this split. And yeah, they're crazy, spazzy, kind of in that line of bands like, you know, Dillinger Escape Plan and Botch, and maybe even like Johnny Truant, if anyone remembers that band. Lots of chaotic, dissonant, weird riffing, insane blast beat patterns, frantic vocal fits. The first song, This Song Could Sell a Million Albums, might have been a little bit off in that prediction. It sounds like it starts off halfway into the song, like it just explodes into an absolute shit fit of just crazy riffs and just nuts drums, and I felt like there should have been like a little bit of build up to it, but no, it just goes off. The production is, you know, kind of muddy on their side, but it's not terrible. And you get a lot of just like weird, jarring transitions. Like I forget which song it was, whether it was the opening track or Flawless Victory. I love the Mortal Kombat reference there. That had like a weird jazzy breakdown to it. It kind of just comes out of nowhere, but that's mathcore. Like it's batshit crazy. It's supposed to catch you off guard with all its weirdness. But yeah, their side I thought was all right. It's the shorter of the two. And then Starring Janet Leigh, another band I had never heard of before. This was billed as experimental death metal. Now apparently this band is still kind of around, but they changed their name to Vile Driver in 2011, and I believe that band is still going. And this band was on Ironclad Recordings, which was Ken Susie's label from Unearth. And yeah, this is kind of similar to the Red Chord. Like it's very heavy, it's very intense, and again it kind of has that sort of mathcore vibe where the transitions are just sort of nuts. The drum patterns in here are just insane sounding. The riffs are more atonal and strange. Like it kind of reminds me of Psyopus, which that band is like a super challenging listen. And also they kind of outdo Closed Casket Funeral in terms of just being strange and atonal and almost kind of nonsensical. In fact, the song Wrath, for a moment, they go into the Brain Stew breakdown from Green Day. Completely caught me off guard. It is 100% what they were doing there, and then it goes back into their batshit crazy, you know, just nuttery that they do. You get whispers and all sorts of weird growls throughout their entire side. Yeah, this is just an absolutely bonkers split here. Definitely makes me want to dig out my Red Chord albums again, because I kind of missed that band. I think they're actually kind of together again. Anyway, yeah, weird split. I want to say it's like under 20 minutes. Like there's only 2 songs per side. All the songs are flat out nuts. Again, if you love Dillinger Escape Plan, Red Chord, Psyopus, and Botch too. I'd say check this out. I'm going to link what I can in the description. I don't know how much I'll be able to find, but if I can find stuff by both bands, I'm just going to throw it in there. Either way, just find a way to check both of them out because, yeah, it's just weird and spastic and kind of goofy and fun in a way. So check it out. Invicta, Triumph, and Torment. This is the second album from this Canadian thrash metal act. I actually know about these guys courtesy of Metalomania. I know that Chris has had the guitarist and principal songwriter on there, Kyle Adesi, a couple of times, and I've been meaning to check out this band for a while, and, well, Mark was kind enough to send me this in that package, so yeah, needless to say, these guys are from Ontario. And this is some absolutely epic, almost kind of death thrash. Man, these guys can flat out play. Like, these songs are very ornate, loads of neoclassical leads, like honestly kind of comparable to Ex Mortis in a lot of ways. Even the vocals are kind of comparable to Ex Mortis. They do have a more death metal sound, but man, it's the guitar work on here. The riffs are exceptional. They are catchy, but they're also like brutal and heavy at times. Like there's definitely some death metal elements that come in the form of like blast beats and some like flat out machine gun riffing. But you also have like some classic heavy metal nods, especially on the New Throne, the opening track, Forces of Annihilation, and the 11-minute banger that is the title track that closes us out. It's definitely, again, like a lot of that Ex Mortis sound in terms of like the neoclassical bits and the big kind of like Iron Maiden melodies, but you also have like some just flat out aggressive technical riffing, like kind of close to like Revocation at points. As much as I love the fast-paced, just like in-your-face, like more thrashy songs in here, like Sinister Obsession and Parasitic Rain, it's these longer, more dynamic songs that I really got into because there's so much going into them. And with each transition, you're just greeted to, again, like amazing riffs. They can be sinister, they can be soaring. There's a really cool like Middle Eastern vibe to The Morning's Light. It kind of leads in almost like a Nile song. Like, I mean, of course, when I think of like Middle Eastern stuff, like Nile is kind of like the first one I think of, but it kind of has that vibe, albeit in a more like thrashy vein. But it's a really cool setup. There's tribal percussion, and it sets out how like huge the song is going to be in general because that song just goes all over the place. Just riffs and melodies and big triumphant hooks. The Apprentice of Death is another one that really stood out to me with the really lavish songwriting across the board. And all of this is very intense. It's, you know, very like kind of foot on the gas, but they let it off the gas in certain sections just to kind of let you catch your breath, but it's right back to it. I love the pacing of this. Like it stays like very in your face. You know, I would say aggressive, but it's aggressive in the sense of like galloping into battle. Like it has this grandiosity to it that I absolutely love. And no matter what direction it goes, there are just tons of catchy riffs and melodies, and again, top-notch guitar playing. I have been meaning to check this band out for a while. I know Crypt has been talking this band out for a while, and I just sort of slept on it for whatever reason. Now I got one of their albums, and I think I need to get their first album too, because this is just truly exceptional fucking songwriting here. If you're a big fan of Ex Mortis, I strongly recommend this band. I would also say Revocation, especially in its heavier sections where it gets a little bit closer to death metal, but a lot of this is very close to Ex Mortis, and if you're a fan of that band, I'm reasonably sure you would be a fan of this, so definitely check this out. This is an absolute banger of an album. Odium At the Bottom. This is the debut album from this Canadian melodic death metal / metalcore act. It's kind of somewhere in between. Now this band actually features an ex-member of Aquila, which is Mark Aruta's band. So they do have a little bit of a connection there, but overall this is very different than Aquila. Like Aquila definitely has like more of that, you know, mid-2000s metalcore with like just a more aggressive bite to it. This is a little bit more on the melodeath side. Honestly, I get a lot of like mid-2000s melodeath. Bands like In Flames, Soilwork, Hypocrisy, a little bit of At the Gates too. But this is definitely more on the melodic side. In fact, I would say a bulk of the vocals on here are actually clean. And the vocals are pretty decent. When it comes down to the growls, I think he sounds a lot like Anders Frieden, but clean singing is more, I don't know, like kind of like crooning and, you know, a little bit deeper register. At times he kind of reminds me a bit of Howard Jones, formerly of Killswitch Engage, and oddly enough, another weird Canadian band that definitely is not fit with this stylistically, but Evans Blue. There's like a little bit of a quiver in his voice that kind of reminds me of the frontman or former frontman of that band. But yeah, this whole thing kind of walks the line between both like mid-2000s metalcore and mid-2000s melodic death metal. Like songs like Frailty and the title track definitely have some more metalcore sort of chug to them, especially the title track. There's a really cool march up, and then it gets into some big heavy syncopated chugs, kind of similar to Unearth a little bit. Need to Exist is a more aggressive number. Like there's definitely a bit of metalcore to that one, but also like, you know, At the Gates and The Haunted as well. And Lifting the Veil has almost kind of like a toolish quality to some of the melodies. Overall, I thought this was like, you know, pretty good, but when it came down to like the melodies and the hooks, they all feel kind of standard, like a little stock for the style in general, like both sides of the coin, both metalcore and melodeath. It's just a bit on the generic side, like not bad or anything like that, just, you know, a lot of stuff that I've heard from bands that probably definitely influenced this. I like the vocals overall, though I do think they get to be a little bit busy. Like there's a lot of sections where I feel like they could have just done like a good instrumental bit to kind of transition to the next vocal part, but again, the vocals were just sort of constant on here. There's some solid songs in here. There's some nice riffs occasionally. I don't think any of it is necessarily bad. It's just, again, kind of blanded in spots. And mostly it's just stuff that I used to be really big into and then I kind of like moved on from. Like there's, tons of classic stuff that I still love, but yeah, this was just, okay. Which there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a decent melodeath / metalcore album, and it does a pretty decent job of blending the two. So yeah, if you're a fan of Killswitch Engage and In Flames, again, like maybe the Haunted 2, Soilwork, stuff like that, check this out. It's not bad. Raider, Trial by Caos. This is the second album from this Canadian death thrash act. I actually got their first album, Guardians of the Fire, in a Metalhead box back in 2020, and I really enjoyed it. It is just flat out kind of like old school death thrash, lots of galloping, thrashy rhythms, with occasional like more death metal centric songs, but a lot of it I would say is really focused on thrash. This band often gets compared to Battlecross, and I think they definitely have some stark similarities. The urgency, the fast-paced nature of it, it's very riffy, it's, heavier in sections, but it's occasionally more melodic. Kind of similar to Invicta, though I don't think like the neoclassical play is really prevalent on here. Same thing with like Ex Mortis or even like Revocation. It's not quite as technical. A lot of this is very straightforward, very riff-driven, and very energetic, and honestly pretty damn solid. While most of this is very thrashy, there's some good groovy, more death metal-centric songs like Devour the Darkness, Juggernaut, Cerebivore, and Rite of Conquest, which honestly is probably the most death metal sounding song on here. Like the riffs feel more sinister, more punishing, but the rest of this moves at like Mach 10 with like thrashy D beats left and right. The vocals are great. I like how like sinister the dude sounds, and this album is all about the riff. I mean, honestly, this band is all about the riff, like because their last one was just riffy high-speed banger after riffy high-speed banger. There's a little bit more variety on here, but these guys got a formula, and it's a fun formula, and it works because, this entire album is kind of like a fun downhill run and a good album to probably get a speeding ticket to. You get some good hooks in here, like I love the galloping syncopated chugs on Arc of Empiria. I think that's how you say that. The songs are fun, they're straightforward. There's, some cool flashy lead play every now and then. They're not really like rewriting the book, and, they're not really kind of like trying to lift it up a little bit more like, Invicta or Ex Mortis, but they're having fun with it, and these songs are just rippers. When I saw this was in the package, this was probably the one band that I really knew out of it, and I kind of already had expectations out of it, and they pretty much delivered exactly what I thought they would. There's a few songs that kind of get outside of the formula, but their formula is solid. I like how just fast and riffy they are, and at no point on this album does it sound like it is lacking in energy. So yeah, if you're a big fan of Battlecross, especially Battlecross, and then, I would say Invicta as well, and maybe a little bit of Ex Mortis, check this out. This is just riffy, straightforward, aggressive, and if you're just looking for something to drive fast to, this is 100% it, so check it out. Anarazel, Our Dark Lord and Saviour. This is the second album from this Australian black metal act, and we are getting into the Adirondack Black Mass stuff they sent us, and they sent us some really vicious black metal here. This features ex-members of Abominator and Cemetery Urn, and this is just some high-speed, riffy black metal, and most people who watch this channel know that I love riffy black metal. This album is fast and vicious. There's some thrashier moments that definitely remind me of like bands like R Noir. Gets off to a nice blasphemous start with Heretic Priest, which has like televangelist samples and like organs in the background, and that pretty much sets up the song to just absolutely explode into just fun, blasphemous fury. I love the riff work on here. It is sinister, it is dark, but it's also very melodic. Heretic Priest has some great catchy hooks and harmonies, as well as Realm of the Crucifier and Death Always Wins. They are 100% right about that. There are loads of like icy cold melodies and even some like kind of like triumphant ones. There's good spots of atmosphere to kind of like give you that nice, sinister, sort of creepy vibe occasionally. And the drum work in here is flat out nuts. There's even some hyper blasts, like a la Cataclysm on 1,000 Churches. And this isn't all like very meat and potatoes too. Like there's some really good technical flourishes on Fuck Your God, Satan is King. Yeah, this band is not about subtlety whatsoever. And vocally, I really like this. This dude just has a great delivery, alternating between highs and lows, and it's very clear sounding too. But the main thing I really liked about this is it matches up catchiness with intensity. At no point is this dull. In fact, I think like all these songs in here are flat out rippers, and they are anchored by just solid, catchy riffs. The main riff that carries Death Always Wins is just fantastically catchy, but it never loses that sinister, dark edge at any point. And I like the atmosphere used a little bit more sparingly in here, like it never gets in the way, like this is about riffs and just being evil and fast, and that's the primary focus that I like in here. And I think that makes these songs just really stand out. None of them hang out too long. I think the pacing on here is really good. This is just solid black metal. I really wouldn't say it's on the raw side. Like I think the production, it's just like well mixed. It still sounds vicious and biting, but it definitely doesn't have like that, you know, hyper gainy lo-fi sound at all. Believe me, we'll get to that in the stack a little bit later. But this is the kind of black metal that I generally gravitate to, where it is just riff driven and it just sounds evil as shit. And yeah, this does that 100%. So yeah, if you're like me and you like riffy black metal, like bands like Armageddon, like Art Noir, even though they're black and thrash, it's definitely kind of part of it. I would say Marduk and Immortal occasionally too. Definitely check this out. This is an absolute banger right here. Exhumation, Twilight of the Funebre Light. This is the debut EP from this one-man Spanish death doom / funeral doom act. Mark Rodriguez. At one point he played live in Graveyard, the Spanish death metal graveyard, not the Swedish, you know, retro rock one. This is yet another one that came to us courtesy of Adirondack Records. This came out in 2022, and first time I've ever heard this band, and this is definitely death doom / funeral doom, because this is slower than hell, and oh my god, there's reverb on everything. Every possible empty space that can be found on here is absolutely squashed by droning everything, whether it is the single droning chugs on here, the strange clean melodies that, you know, sort of dance above the riffs, the droning vocals that are just cavernous as hell, and I think he says like 1 or 2 words per verse, and of course the drums. I mean, this moves at about like 1 or 2 beats a minute. And with each beat, you have a giant booming kick drum and then a snare that is possibly still echoing right now. Oh yeah, and there are church organs too. The mix on here is definitely pretty muddy though. Like it can be kind of hard to make out like distinct moments on here, even though like, again, it's like a lot of single chord drones, but the tone itself is kind of like fuzzy and just kind of strange sounding. Plus, again, all the reverb on here, like everything is just echoing on into eternity. Like it sounds like it was written inside of a giant cavern or a crypt. Which, I mean, this is death doom / funeral doom. That is kind of what you want. Like everything is just very dense and thick and kind of monotonous. And I mean, you know, not too bad. Like a lot of the stuff I would say is maybe like a more simplified version of like Spectral Voice. But I think like Spectral Voice does a little bit more with songwriting dynamics. Like these songs are all kind of similar in terms of like the pace, the mood, the atmosphere. It all feels kind of interchangeable. Like some songs, the organs are a little bit more prominent. On others, you have, again, more of the clean guitar melodies on top of the droning riffs. And occasionally you get like some chanted, haunting vocals that sound like a doomed choir singing from hell. But all 3 tracks definitely have like a similar sound and similar dynamics to them. Like granted, there are like slight differences, but in terms of like telling them apart, in terms of like the riffs and such, it'd be a little bit difficult. Like the last track, Tears in the Burial Ground, I would say is a little bit faster overall. Like it's 3 beats a minute maybe. Like it's notably just like a little bit faster than the other 2 tracks. Procession to the Abyss and Funeral Emanation. But again, it kind of has the same characteristics where they are all long, drawn out, you know, just very dark and oppressive, but unfortunately, like, not super memorable. Like, this definitely echoes a lot of bands that I do like. Like, I even think, like, there's some moments that sound like esoteric on here. But I feel like this is kind of like the meat and potatoes, like, almost sort of like generic version of it. It's just very by the numbers. And I like it. I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think maybe the production could definitely use a little bit of work because it's just very muddy sounding. But overall, like, it just doesn't necessarily stand out for me. Like, it's just, another, really dense, dark, kind of like soupy sounding Funeral Doom / Death Doom album. Nothing wrong with that. But yeah, if you like, again, like Spectral Voice and maybe like Dream Unending, but not entirely in that vibe, just because there's a lot of stuff that goes on in Dream Unending that this band is definitely not doing. It is very minimalistic, but I still think, if you like just that droning, heavy, monotonous sound, you'll probably find some stuff you dig on it. So check it out. Herculean Death, Lost Hierarchy of Dark Twisted Arts EP. This is the second EP from this one-man Portland, Oregon-based black metal act, like honestly kind of like raw, almost depressive black metal. The one gentleman involved is named Finley Allen, but he goes by a much different name and much more verbose one. Cascadian Destroyer of Degenerate Hordes. That is his full name on here, and that is him on the cover wearing either a bathrobe or a karate gi. I don't know which. Dealer's choice. It could be one of the boxing robes, like when they go into the ring. I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments. It could be either one of those. Anyway, this is just very raw, very primal, almost kind of depressive black metal. Like, there's definitely a more somber vibe to it. Like, it doesn't feel like super sinister and evil. Well, at least all the time. It opens up with, what I would describe as a piano recital, but it's, very depressive. It's just an isolated piano, and then it starts building in harmonies. And then we get into the very, very, very lo-fi production on here. Like, the guitars are thin, they are staticky, the drums are very muffled, the vocals at times are very muffled. Honestly, the whole thing kind of sounds pretty muffled. Like, all the mics they used to record this were all wrapped in towels or something. There's also like a steady analog hiss in the background for all the tracks, and it cuts off right away as soon as the track ends, and then you hear it kind of, sizzle up in the background before the next song takes off. The vocals are very cavernous, they're very ghastly, the whole thing sounds very cold and icy, and this definitely has like some like production issues in terms of like going song to song, because certain songs sound like they were produced differently than other songs. Like, I don't think this was all done in one session or with the same settings, because sometimes the drums are a little bit louder, sometimes the vocals are a little bit louder. I really noticed that in the track Defeated in the Worship of Beauty. The vocals just all of a sudden got a lot louder, and then, the riffs kind of stayed about the same in the background, so I don't know if they just did vocals at a different time over that and the mic was better, or he was just closer to it. I don't know. And to that song's credit, it does break out of the, formula that's on here, which a lot of this is just cold tremolo riffs, a steady, black metal blast. Like, this is very, very second wave and very raw sounding, so you get a lot of static moments on here, but Defeated in the Worship of Beauty actually brings in some like punkier elements. There's some D beats. It's a little bit more like, later Dark Throne than it is like the, Unholy Trinity Dark Throne, I guess. I do have to say I like the last song in here, Reaped, Left, and Buried. It's probably the most dynamic of all the tracks. There's a more doom-laden breakdown. There's a piano that goes through that song that I think adds a lot of extra dreary character to it. It's just a very depressive, dark song, and it doesn't necessarily stay kind of in the same gear, which was kind of an issue in here because a lot of these songs in here kind of do the same thing. Like, you have a lot of cold tremolos, a lot of these static blast beats, and, some shaky transitions in those songs. They just don't feel very smoothed out, and inevitably they're just transitioning into another kind of long, droning part. Raw black metal isn't necessarily my thing overall, but it could be yours. Like, I thought it was decent for what it was. I did think the interludes in here were a little unnecessary and kind of like derailed it at points, but honestly, again, this really isn't my style of black metal, so I would say if you're, more of a fan of like just very raw second wave stuff, like it's not necessarily very riffy, it's very cold and depressive and dark, check this out. You might really dig it. While it wasn't really my thing, it could be your thing. You won't know until you check it out. Sacrodeath, Engendro del Caos. This is the second album from this Chilean death thrash act. This band has been around since 2004, apparently. I have never heard of this band before, but they put out a lot of splits and EPs, and, this is only their second full-length overall. And forgive me, everything on here is in Spanish, like even some of the notes in terms of when it came out. That's also in Spanish too, so I'm probably going to struggle a little bit here. But anyway, this is some just straightforward, very riffy, meat and potatoes death thrash. Honestly, on the death metal side, it kind of reminds me a lot of bands like Obituary and Jungle Rot. Very straightforward grooves. You have like some more thrashy up-tempo sections. And it's just generally very like meat potatoes riffing and a lot of like 90s death metal worship, I would say. The opening track, Engendro, which is an instrumental, honestly, it's kind of similar to Redneck Stomp. Like, the awesome instrumental from Obituary. Like, it just kind of comes in and it just hangs on to like a good riff and groove. It kind of just gets you set up. There really isn't that kind of like southern rock tinge to it that Redneck Stomp has, but it kind of does the same thing and sets up the next track. Paseo? I don't know. Anyway, that song comes in with like some good thrashy sections, some good death metal grooves. This album does a good job of like balancing out the styles, even though I think it favors probably 90s death metal a little bit more. The vocals are very raspy and very throaty, like again, very early death metal sounding. There's even some gang vocals that give it like a little bit more of a hardcore / punk flair on Tangente Suicida. And while I like straightforward meat potatoes death metal and thrash metal and I guess death thrash too, this album does have some issues, like the production here I don't think is very good. In fact, the snare I think is just way too loud at points. And songs like Tangente Suicida and Tierra del Lamentos, I'm sorry, I think are a bit too long for what they are. Like, I think both of those songs are around the 6 or 7 minute range, and I don't think they do enough in there to really justify them being that long, because a lot of it is just repeated riffs and kind of going back and forth to the same stuff and revisiting it. Both of them just end up becoming kind of dull and repetitive. And, while there are some cool moments that, did stand out in the songs, I feel like there could have been some serious editing on there. And the song Falsos Profetas, there's kind of like a nu metal riff in there, like a, kind of groove metal, nu metal. I don't know. It's the, the corn riff, the da-da-da-da, like, it gets repeated a lot. I used to really like that riff, but I like it in my nu metal and groove metal, not death thrash. Like that song, I don't know, I feel like it hangs onto that riff much longer than it should. In fact, I don't think they should have hung on to that riff at all. And that is kind of the closer in here, or at least it would be if, Caos, the outro, wasn't there. And it really shouldn't be, because it's just a 45-second outro of someone speaking over some ambient noise in Spanish, and it sounds like something was like pulled from a movie trailer. Like, it doesn't really fit. It doesn't cap off the album very well. It just feels like extra to give this album another 45 seconds. But overall, honestly, this isn't that bad. Like, it's just, again, straightforward meat and potatoes. Like, if you like Obituary and Jungle Rot and like just more straightforward thrash metal in general, it's definitely got its moments. I do think it has its issues, but overall, style-wise, this is a lot of stuff that I used to listen to when I was a teenager. So, I mean, I still have a soft spot for some of it, just not all of it. But yeah, if you like some meat and potato stuff, definitely check it out, give it a whirl, form your own opinions. Again, wasn't entirely for me, but I did find some stuff in here I did like, so yeah, check it out. Retrofaith, The Horror Has Risen from the Tomb. This is the second album from this Spanish thrash metal act. I think this is one of the first ones we pulled out of the box from Adirondack, and we're like, oh wow, this is bound to be fun with this album cover. Now apparently this had 2 album covers. We apparently got the lesbian vampires hanging out in a dungeon with headless Hugh Jackman version. Looks like a fun party. Definitely had to cleverly at least censor some of this because, well, I mean, I'm not sure the blonde is actually real blonde, and there's a reason I know that, and I'm hoping the glare is keeping that semi-covered. Anyway, this is kind of a weird release. Like, I would almost say it's like blackened thrash, but I don't know if like black metal is necessarily the vibe. Like, this is very spooky thrash, I guess you could say. Like, there's a lot of like dark, sinister, spooky riffs. There's keyboards that come in, and they're not necessarily like, I don't know, like haunting and atmospheric. They kind of feel whimsical and like Addams Family-ish. It all feels like very theatrical, like especially the vocals. The vocals are very over the top. They're not like the best, but I mean, they're at least like interesting. There's a lot of like, you know, creepy, sinister riffs on here, like the opening track, the title track, and the Vampire Theater, which features like a organ solo in there, which, I mean, it's good. It's just weird. Like a lot of the stuff, I feel like it's just tonally all over the place. Like you have songs that are just very thrashy and straightforward and just loaded with solid riffs, like Daughters of the Night or My Damnation. Both those songs are heavy and, you know, a little bit more straightforward. And then you have songs that are just kind of like all over the place. Like Into the Catacombs has kind of like symphonic elements behind it. It feels, I don't know, kind of forced, like they're kind of just mashing this stuff together. It's like, I don't know, it all sounds gothic, right? Let's just see if it works. And it kind of didn't. There's some really interesting drums and like layered guitars on White Zombie, which is not a reference to the band, probably a reference to the movie. I don't know, it could be either. Who knows? This album's kind of strange. Baseline, what I got from this is these guys love horror and riffs and naked chicks. Because, I mean, the entire time I'm looking at tracks in here, I'm also looking at a chick suspended by her legs with her boobs and her bush out, getting her throat slit. So it's safe to say there's a fair degree of camp with this band. Honestly, though, it's kind of fun. Like, I don't know if I would come back to it for, like, just, you know, a good thrashy listen to, you know, get my blood boiling and get pumped up. Like, this would be kind of like something I would put on in front of friends. Like, dude, listen to this just very strange, very quirky, weird thrash band from Spain that I had never heard of up until this point. And, yeah, it's odd. I don't know. Like, it's kind of hard to get a read on it. It feels serious at times, and then at other times it just feels like they're kind of fucking around a bit. I don't know. If you're a fan of just strange thrash metal, I would say, like, check it out. Like, not strange in the way of, like, you know, like early Voivod or anything like that. Like, just, I don't know, weird. I really don't know who I would compare this to. Like, it's just kind of flat out silly. And I don't know, maybe that'll draw you in a little bit and make you want to check it out. But yeah, it's weird and oddly kind of fun in a way, but again, not something I would return to very often. That's about all I got for this one. So I don't know, check it out. Skullpture, A Horrifying Death. This is the first EP from this Chilean death metal act. They have 2 full-length albums, and I guess their earlier stuff is more death thrash, and then recently they have taken a shift to more just straight up death metal. And while I can't compare their earlier stuff to this stuff, I will say that this is a flat out vicious, disgusting, old school death metal EP. Granted, more like modern production, but it's definitely in the vein of bands like Cannibal Corpse. I would definitely say like Monstrosity, Malevolent Creation, but also like a bit of like Suffocation's level of brutality. This is just riff after riff, breakdown after breakdown. It's just punishing and mean, and I dig pretty much everything on here. Except for the intro, which it's just because it's an intro, and it's an intro on an EP, and EPs definitely don't need intros. Like, I'm not a fan of intros in general when it comes down to albums, but EPs definitely don't need them. But when you get down to all these savage riffs, you completely forget about the intro. Like, this is just a brutal, non-stop battering of an EP. The title track has an absolutely catchier than hell breakdown riff on it. Devoured has these sinister, just like morbid angel tremolos all over it, but lots of groove. Like, this isn't just a blast beat and breakdown fest. Like, there's just great groovy pockets on here. The guitar tone is awesome. It's thick, it's heavy. The vocals are definitely more along the lines of, like, you know, 90s death metal. Like, it's not super low gutturals, it's like a good mid-range. The song The Eyes of Horror has a little bit of their thrashiness, I think, still left over, but it also has some cool gravity blasts in it, as well as some cool, like, old school, like, kind of like thrashy blast beats. Again, another crushing breakdown on there. And again, I love the fact that this has a lot of cool groove. Like, the opening to Infamous is nice and kind of moody and dark, and then it slowly starts getting faster and heavier and more brutal. This whole EP whoops ass, and it closes in such grand fashion with a killer cover of Deicide's Kill the Christian. I like the fact that it's a nice deep cut, and it's probably still one that Deicide can't play live in certain venues or certain states because reasons, I don't know. Like forever ago, like some courts ruled that they couldn't play certain songs like namely Kill the Christian in certain states. I think California, they're not allowed to. I don't know. They may have repealed those. I don't know. I mean, I believe in Australia, Cannibal Corpse is still not allowed to play like certain songs from certain albums because, again, dumb reasons. It just doesn't make sense because they're not allowing you to play one song because it's graphically brutal or, you know, blasphemous or something like that, but you can play 50 other songs that are just as blasphemous, just as gory, just as brutal, but they don't bat an eye. I don't know, I don't get it. Like, be morally consistent or don't fucking bother, I guess. Anyway, this EP is absolutely savage, relentless. Again, the only thing that I can pick at it about is the fact that it has an intro on it. That is it. Outside of that, this is just crushing death metal that's both modern and definitely like 90s loving too. Every song in here I thought absolutely ripped. If you're a fan of any of the bands I mentioned, like namely Cannibal Corpse, Suffocation for sure, Monstrosity, definitely check this out. This is a nasty listen. Thaumaturgy, Tenebrous, Oblations. This is the first full length from this Kansas-based one-man black and death metal act. The one man involved just goes by the initials KT. That is all I could find on him. I know nothing else other than the fact that he likes insanely evil, dissonant sounding music, because this is just a super dark, dense, kind of all-consuming, evil sounding release, and I really dig it. I do think the production's a little bit muffled. It does feel like the mix could have been like a little bit better, but musically, this is just dark and just heavier than hell. Lots of dissonance, you know, big tremolos, layered sort of just anguished vocals, big death doom breakdowns, pockets of blast beats. This whole thing is just a vicious sounding album. The guitar tone is very chunky and very metallic. The vocals are cavernous and dark. I like that some of these songs have like good, long, like brooding starts, like Null, Cosmic Void, Rites of Uncreation, and Withered Flesh Effigy. They're good about setting the atmosphere, and then when they get down to like the absolutely crushing riffs, like it just kind of perfectly encapsulates the mood. The song Blood of Ancient Serpent has Morbid Angel kind of all over it. It has the weird riff structure and just like dissonant, ugly, sort of like cosmic evil atmosphere to it. Lots of layered tremolo harmonies, quote unquote, because I mean, I say harmonies in any other context and you'll think it's something pretty. It's not. It's just dark and evil sounding, but it does add its own kind of hook to it. One of the few complaints I can make about this still kind of comes back to the mix, and it's sort of like volume levels, because I think the drums sound a little too quiet and they get drowned out by these massive guitars and even the giant cavernous vocals on there. But outside of that, like, I love the musical style. Now, we got an EP that came out before this, but I ended up giving that one to John. So he's probably going to cover that in the West John Jammin'. And I have listened to that one, and it's a little bit different, but I don't know. I'm kind of curious what his take on it is, because this is just monstrously dark and probably the most evil sounding thing I think I've heard that came out of Kansas. Like, you know, Origin's, you know, heavy and brutal and technical, but I don't know if they're quite as evil as this. But yeah, if you're a big fan of Morbid Angel, I would even say bands like Portal a little bit, like it's a little bit more riffy than Portal, or like a less melodic Sulfur Aeon. Definitely check this out. This is just gross and dark and grimy, but in all the right ways. Dead Soul Symphony, Sermons to the Sick. This is the first full length from this Wisconsin-based death metal act. A while ago, this band sent me their first EP, Mind Plague. I really enjoyed it. I went over it in a collection update, and they got a hold of me recently and said, hey, would you like a copy of our first full length? And it's going to be a little bit different. Also, we'll send you a shirt. And of course, I was like, yeah, dude, because I liked that first one. It was just solid, straightforward, death thrash, riffy, fast, aggressive. I like all those things. And again, they told me this one was a little bit different, and they're right. This band is definitely pushed more towards the death metal side on here, but It's very specifically sounding a lot more like Pestilence and Asphyx. Namely, the vocals are a little bit more dry. They definitely have that Martin Van Buren sound. But in terms of the music, it's really kind of broadened. Like, the thrashier vibes are dialed down, like they're still there, but a lot of this, I think, goes for just straight up death metal with really creative riffs. They've incorporated more dissonant riffs on here. And overall, I think the songwriting is a little bit more creative, like it has more flavors to it. A lot of the stuff kind of reminds me of Horrendous. Not like, you know, the most recent one, just because that album is an amazing mindfuck, but more like their earlier material where it was just really just cool old school death metal. Like, it has that sort of vibe. You still have your thrashier moments on songs like Die Glock, the title track, Visage, but a lot of this really kind of just sticks to like just really cool old school death metal with weird riff structure, cool transitions all over the place. This really doesn't sound very much like the EP, but at the same time, I still know it's the same band because there are still some hallmarks of their older sound in here. This is definitely a big push forward in terms of songwriting and style. And as much as this feels very old school, it also has like some cool modern flourishes, and there's just some cool stuff that they do that kind of puts their stamp on the style, like the strange dissonant melodies every now and then, and kind of off-kilter riff structure. The song Coma is probably one of the biggest standouts. That is a longer track with lots of big dynamic shifts, crazy riffs, really interesting melodies, and it's flat out catchy too. Like, they found some really good melodic hooks in there to kind of just drive home some good melodies on there. This whole album is really, really good, and I expected it to be good. I liked their first offering. I thought that was a solid EP across the board, but this definitely has a lot more going on, and I think it's really well put together. If you're a big fan of like Death and Horrendous, maybe a little bit like Morgoth in there too, definitely check this out. This is a really solid album. Postulants, Beliefs of Dead Stargazers and Soothsayers. This is the first full length from this Australian death metal act. I get into these guys with their first EP, and forgive me, I have to read this because this EP title is ridiculous. The Birth of the Beginning Before the Inception of the End. It's an absolutely ridiculous name for such a short offering, or just in general. Anyway, I thought that EP was pretty decent. Like, it was just good, straight up, you know, gnarly, old school death metal, kind of similar to like Tomb Mold and stuff like that. And I saw that this was out actually a while ago, and I finally got around to picking it up, and this is much better than the EP. It's a lot of stuff that I could draw comparisons to, like Incantation and Immolation, like both in the riff style. The vocals actually sound a lot like Ross Dolan in a lot of spots on here. You have Death Doom breakdowns with a little bit more brutal edge, but this album kind of goes all over the place, and actually started kind of reminding me more of Blood Incantation as I went on. Not going like full bore like proggy or like super technical, but in terms of the songwriting, it got a little bit more strange and kind of, I don't know, cosmic sounding at times. It definitely has its more straightforward bangers, like Concupiscence, I think is just kind of thrashy and riffy. But as this goes on, it gets more strange and weird, and the atmosphere sort of changes, like Out With the Plains of Ultimatum. It's a weird title. That song gets kind of like trippy and weird, like there's like strange guitar effects going on. The transitions get to be a little bit more jagged and technical. Extirpated Conquest turns into almost a flat out like sludge metal song, like the riffs are more like droning and kind of like bendy and gross. And then you have flat out like old school death metal rippers like Procured Propensities. Sounds like it came out of Tampa in the 90s. You even have some more flat out brutal moments on here where it starts aping like Suffocation a bit, like Demiurge Divertissement. I don't know if I've ever heard that second word. But yeah, like this whole album starts kind of going all over the place and exploring a lot of different realms of death metal and executing it really well. I love the production on it. The guitars sound thick and meaty. The vocals are really good. There's good backup screams too. I do have an issue with some of the interludes on here where they are just like spacey ambiance, and you know, there's 3 of them, and it just kind of like derails the good time for me because I'm being hit with killer riff after killer riff and just awesome song after awesome song in here, and then I have to sit through like 2 minutes of ambience and like weird guitar noise and groans and hisses and moans in the background, and kind of just want to get on with it. I really don't feel that there's a need for all of that extra atmosphere in here, especially when the songs themselves have, you know, atmospheric bits in them, and they're incorporated really well. Like, there's no need for, like, standalone atmospheric tracks. I mean, that's just me. I'm not the biggest fan of, like, additional atmosphere and stuff like that, especially when they kind of carry on too much, and having 3 tracks in here was just way too much for me. But everything else in here, I think, is awesome and a big step up from the EP, kind of a carry-on theme from the last album I went over. This is just solid death metal that doesn't necessarily stay in one camp entirely, and I think kind of explores, at least within death metal. Like, there's nothing on here where I would say it's like proggy or, you know, it turns into like a flat-out sludge metal song. It has elements of those incorporated into their overall death metal style, and I think it really works. This is a banger of a CD, and once again, more killer death metal this year. Like, we actually need it. Like, save some for next year. I mean, I imagine next year's gonna be loaded with killer death metal too, so whatever. This is absolutely awesome. If you're a fan of, again, like Tomb Mold, Blood Incantation, regular Incantation, Immolation, stuff like that, maybe even Hate Eternal too, check this out. This is a monster of an album. And I got one more for you, even though I don't have a physical copy of this album because they didn't put out a CD for whatever reason. But Blood Incantation, Luminescent Bridge. Now, this was billed as a single. I guess we could say it's more of an EP just because it's 2 tracks, but both tracks are long and it's like 20 minutes. So I would call it an EP. Anyway, Colorado death metal act. Kind of loved and hated. I don't know, that last one, Time Wave Zero, definitely seemed like it irked a lot of people. I thought it was pretty cool. But the fact that a death metal act put out a Tangerine Dream worship album just seemed to really set people off. Anyway, this is not Time Wave Zero, or at least not entirely Time Wave Zero. This is 2 songs, and they're both really different and are both kind of like showcasing an evolution in their sound overall. The first song on it, Obliquity of the Ecliptic, is pretty much what you'd expect from Blood Incantation, though I think it's done a little bit better. Like, it's very similar to the last full length, but I think their proggier sense is really taken over. The production is a lot different. It's much cleaner. I mean, it still has its grit on it, but the riffs really stand out more. Like, the guitar tone has a good solid crunch. The vocals are maybe a little bit less cavernous, but the big thing on here is I think the proggy elements are really coming out to play, and they are incorporating more synths on this one too. And that synth and guitar interplay I think is absolutely fantastic on here, and I would go as far as to say, like, this is one of Blood Incantation's catchiest songs. Like, there are some really solid melodies. I wouldn't say it loses any of the brutality, but it does gain melody, and the song really just jumps out at me. I absolutely love it. Now, the title track, Luminescent Bridge, is kind of in a way a carryover from Time Wave Zero. It is more built around the synths, and then the guitars and drums come in later, but they are definitely not like the biggest stars of the show. The guitars start doing a little bit more, but this is very slow, plodding, atmospheric. And honestly, I think it kind of works, though it isn't necessarily what I wanted on this 2-song EP, just because I feel like we got it on the last one. This is definitely more dynamic and less, you know, droning atmosphere than Time Wave Zero, but at the same time, it's not the giant riff storm like the first track where the synths are integrated in, you know, different parts and it still stays really heavy. Like, this is definitely a more dreamy, lush, ambient track that just happens to have a little bit more going on musically than, say, like Tangerine Dream. It's not just the synths. So in a way, it's kind of a bridge between Time Wave Zero and what I think they have been doing in the past, or at least maybe what they're doing in the future. Because I think the first track is probably the direction they're gonna go. Like, it's definitely more proggy and more nuanced. It's still brutal and heavy and technical, but I feel like that's the direction they're gonna go. And while it's not like a big departure from their sound overall, I feel like it's an evolution of it, and that's probably the direction they're gonna go. But overall, I liked this EP or single, whatever you want to call it. I really would have liked it if there was a CD for this. That would have been nice. I wouldn't have had to download it. I hate downloading music, but that's just me. I like physical media, and I know they have like vinyl out for it. They probably have tapes. I mean, it's Blood Incantation. They're probably working on an 8-track for it. But yeah, hopefully this does get a CD print, because I would really like to pick it up. I do think it might still end up being kind of divisive with the fans, and I don't know if it's going to win any of their detractors over, because Blood Incantation detractors seem to be popping up a lot. I heard the term hipster metal used a lot with them. I personally don't give a shit. I just want to hear good music, and I think they put out a pretty solid EP here. So yeah, if you're a big fan of Blood Incantation, naturally, and Morbid Angel, and like Immolation, Incantation, stuff like that, I would say check it out. I mean, if you're a vinyl collector, at least they'll have you covered in, physical media. Again, maybe they'll get a CD out, I don't know, but still, check it out. And that'll knock out yet another collection update. I'm already working on the next one. I'm almost entirely caught up here. I might just do this next one as a shorter collection update, just to cover some stuff that was sent to me. But of course, we got a lot of other stuff going on. There's still a handful of reviews I'd like to cover. I haven't checked out and seen what December has to offer, but probably at least the first couple of weeks of December, we might cover some stuff. But at this point, we are getting down to our year-end lists and such. And then after that, again, probably going to do some of the retro reviews. We got the Black Dahlia Murder ranking to work on. And honestly, it looks like there's going to be a couple of releases in January that should be pretty interesting to go over. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit slower here just because of the holidays and shit. But believe me, we are going to get back to work pretty damn quickly. So of course, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also on our channel. But if you're looking for Thrall stuff like t-shirts and hats and such, thrallsmetal.com is where to go. We have t-shirts at a discounted price for the older ones. The newer ones are still full price. And again, we have hats now too. So if you're looking for any of that stuff, that is where to find it. And of course, thank you to everyone that has liked, followed, subscribed, all that stuff means the world to us. I'm recording this the night before Thanksgiving here in the US, so the thankful part feels extra relevant here. You guys are absolutely awesome. You guys have kept us going all these years. About to close in on 5 years of doing this, and it's been an absolutely awesome ride, and you guys are large in part the reason why. So once again, big thank you, and we will catch you later.